Start off by thanking you all for coming today on a sunny Friday. I know the weather's been awful recently, so you're all coming into indoors with the sun shining. Thanks all for coming. I'm not going to say too much. I'm going to introduce Gordon Mars in the Blackpool South MP, who will introduce Jeremy, and then we'll get to questions, because we know you're not here to listen to me, Gordon, let's be honest. So thanks all for coming. But first off, I just want to thank you all for all your help over the last few months. I think it's been a fantastic sale pay, and I think we've shown it with the vote that we got. I also want to acknowledge the help of the trade unions in that campaign. Without them, we would not have got the support, we would not have got the equipment, the letters, the printing, the money to fight the general election. And it's great that we've got two regional secretaries here from the CW, Carl, my dad, and also Paul from the GMB, who's trusty sidekick, Neil, keeping him in check. We've got Ian from the Bakers Union, we've got people from Unite, Unison, RNT, it's fantastic. And as a trade unionist, I was proud to have their support in the general, and I know going forward we'll continue to have their support, and we will take the seat from Paul Maynard, I can promise you that. Okay, well, now let's introduce Gordon Mars from Blackpool South MP.
Chris, and can I, on your behalf, it's not like it's somebody else's shortly, I hope, but can I, on your behalf, welcome Jeremy to Blackpool, and can I say it's great to see friends and colleagues from all across Blackpool in the file, and Chris has already done some of the honours, so I won't repeat all of them, but I do just want to underline what he said about the trade unions, because the trade unions have been a rock to many of the campaigns that we have run in Blackpool, and we really appreciate everything they've done, and I say that twice blessed, both as a CWU and as a GMB member, and also having Ian in the front row, who we've chatted over biscuits, I think, from time to time is the right thing to say. Now, modern politics, doorstep or online, you choose. Well, as we've discovered in this election, you have to do both, but the issue is how you deal with that. And John Prescott famously said that the values of the Labour Party are eternal, but the ways that we put them across have to change. And as a party, we therefore need a narrative, which is not just about statistics, but about human beings. And we need leaders who can have that narrative, but not a narrative on the Fiora principle, where party members are just part of a junior sales force, but party members as key to a left-of-centre radical party. And unthinking obedience to a lacklustre, repetitive, strong and stable gets you nowhere when the product's not up to it. So people here in Blackpool have been resilient and also felt left behind. Austerity, the rough end of globalisation. We need, and we have, a leader who understands about that and who is capable of a narrative which matches the great appeals to the British public of 1945, you'll forgive me for this, I am a historian, 1945, 1964 and 1997. We have to have a party, as we showed in the election, which is a party about connection, about hope, about vision. And one of the things that I admire most about Jeremy is the way in which he combines those virtues. Let me tell you very briefly, I was fortunate enough to have the last question in the PLP Hustings in 2015, before Jeremy won the leadership. And I asked all of the candidates a question about lifelong learning and higher education and the Open University, all of which I'm passionate about. And the way in which Jeremy has spelt out the National Education Service, as he has spelt out so many other things, is a model in terms of that doing, to have that vision. Because if there isn't any vision, then the people perish, as the book of Proverbs tells us. If there's no hope for women who shorten pensions, and Jeremy has just been talking to the WASPy women in Cleveland, they perish. If you get fenced-in disabled people, the sort of stuff that comes up week by week in my casework, they perish. Young people blocked from skills, labouring under huge debts. Older people wanting to retrain and reskill. 0 hours contracts. The dignity that you're deprived of if you are constantly having to depend on food banks. And in really practical terms, the people perish in places like Grenfell Towers when the structures are not there to support them, and where the response has been the response of negativism. And Jeremy has been able to embody in what he has done and what he has said that sense of optimism, that connectivity with ordinary people. We bucked the trend here in my seat in Blackpool South, because if I had £100 for every journey who come up and said it was a done deal as a certain Tory gain, then I'd be on the way to being a rich man. And we had a fantastic achievement here in Blackpool North, and cut through the divide sometimes between young and old people, because we were offering them hope, and also because we had a fantastic candidate named Chris Webb. But what the Tories are offering is nothing. Frozen like rabbits in the headlight. There would be successors to May, just like bit parts in Games of Thrones. Theresa May, of course, has been reduced to an image in Tussauds. Well, they may be waxing her, but she's waning. And she has not got the slightest idea how to deal with Brexit, or how to deal with the 21st century, which is not the fag end of Thatcherism, but is a society which we need to have, and need to have very, very strongly, for the many and not for the few. Jeremy showed in the general election that he was able to articulate that, to connect with people, to show warmth, to show empathy. We are going forward with him, with this great tour that he's doing, to get that victory at the general election sooner rather than later, and to get a Labour MP here in Blackpool North and Cleveland. Jeremy.
Gordon, thank you very much, not just for what you've just said, but for all that you do as our spokesperson on further and higher education. Your connectivity with the sector, with the students, and with the vision that we have, that education is a lifelong opportunity, and our absolute determination to end fees in colleges, universities, and in adult education, because that was one of the great achievements of Labour governments of the past, was opening up further and higher education to everybody in our society. I don't believe education should be rationed to those that can afford it. It should be available for all that can benefit from it and need it. That is what our principle is. And I want to thank you all for the support you gave to Chris in the election campaign, and for the great results you achieved here in Blackpool. We're ready for it. Whenever Theresa May decides to call another election, we're up for it, and we'll be campaigning to ensure that Blackpool has 2 Labour MPs, 2 people to represent because Blackpool, like so many other seaside towns, suffers from poverty, suffers from a lack of investment, and suffers from a government that simply doesn't want to think about or understand the levels of poverty and deprivation that exist in various parts of the country. Just because people live in a beautiful place alongside the sea doesn't necessarily put food on the table. Just because they live in a beautiful part of the country doesn't make them wealthy. It means we have to have an economic strategy and a policy that reaches to all parts of the country and ensures fairness of investment across the whole country. This government celebrated their return, albeit in much reduced circumstances after the election, and all that they'd said about the Northern Powerhouse by cancelling the electrification projects on the railways and not doing anything which we've said we will do and absolutely will do about establishing a national investment bank that will invest in all parts of the country fairly, and it will be regionally based, and decisions about major investment will be made in those regions, the northwest, the north, the northeast, so that we get that fairness of investment all across the country. Gordon quite rightly and Chris quite rightly thanked the unions for all their support in the general election campaign. I understand that Unite, Unison, GMB and CWU are all represented here this afternoon, as well as other unions. I want to say thank you very much for all the support that you gave us in the election campaign, and the way in which union members participated increasingly in the day-to-day activities of the party and helping to shape our policies for the future, because that is what makes the Labour Party different from any other party. Unions are part of our structure, part of our very DNA, part of our makeup, and part of our whole cause of winning a Labour government that will bring about rights at work from day one, that will bring about rights to be joined and be represented by a trade union, and a Labour government will not be found wanting to be in breach of International Labour Organisation Convention standards. We are a party that will ensure we're working right for. I'm really pleased to see Ian from the Bakers Union here on the front row. Give us a wave, Ian. That's not much of a wave, that's a thumb up. Thank you. Such a shy, modest, retiring man. He just sent me some news earlier about the campaign the Bakers Union are mounting to gain union recognition and decent wages at McDonald's. Well done them on the campaign they've mounted. Well done them on working with the American unions on the fast food workers campaign. It's because those that work in call centres, those that work in the fast food industry, those that work in the hospitality industry do fantastic work, very often not represented by trade unions, very often very badly paid with very insecure work. Well done the Bakers Union on its achievements in Greggs and other companies, and good luck and our support in the campaign to unionise McDonald's. Well done, Ian. The election campaign we've just come through was one in which, as Gordon said, as Chris said, we're all written off at the beginning, weren't we? Remember all those commentators? Remember all those editorials? Remember all those newspapers? What? They wrote us off. They said it's the end of Labour, the end of the Labour Party, the end of the left, the end of socialist ideas. Wow. Wow. Some understanding of history, really. You know, they should think about that. I, in fact, was asked a question halfway through the campaign by George Eaton of the New Statesman about this, and I said, you know what, George? Just get out a bit more. Just get out a bit more and talk to people, and you wouldn't ask such a stupid question. Because what we did was went out there at the beginning of the campaign, despite everything that's been said, with determination, with optimism, and with a determination to win the election. So we took a campaign to get people to register to vote, and 2 million more people joined the electoral register. Thank you to everyone who campaigned in that, both in the Labour Party and in other community organisations that did so much about it. And then we produced a manifesto for the many, not the few. And I pay a huge tribute and thanks to those that got together to write the manifesto, all in 2 weeks. An amazing document. It had to be written in a very short time, and it was. And then we launched at Bradford University, and it took us 2 hours to get out of the university for a number of students who wanted to ask questions about it, talk about it, and were interested in it. And you know what? It's on its 3rd reprint already. And the Tory Party manifesto was taken down from their website 6 hours after it was published. I'm sure somebody has saved the Tory manifesto somewhere for posterity, and it's probably in a university library somewhere. But ours is a living document which we are now developing. But in the campaign, what we were doing was something that was different. We were saying that the austerity we've had for the past 7 years, since the Tories and Lib Dems cobbled together a coalition in 2010, was a political choice they made. Lots of public money had been used to bail out the banking industry and ensure the banking industry continued. Tories and Lib Dems decided that the cost of austerity, the cost of the financial crisis, had to be borne by the poorest people and the poorest communities and the public sector in this country. And so our local authorities have had their funding cut by, in some cases, 40 or 50%, always the biggest cuts in the poorest areas. The freezing of public sector pay has resulted in a 14% pay cut in reality for NHS workers, has resulted in many people who work for local authorities staying at work but with fewer colleagues, and they're often doing 1 or 2 or even 2.5 jobs as they were covering for colleagues that have left because they're determined to keep public services going. And whenever there's an emergency or a disaster, as there was in Manchester that dreadful night, as there was in London at London Bridge, as there was in my own constituency in Finsbury Park, and there was at Grenfell Tower of a different order. Politicians line up to congratulate the emergency workers. Tory MPs toured the country in the general election campaign, pitching up at hospitals whether invited or not, always wanting to be seen on the side of those that work for us all the time, protect us. And then the first vote we ensured in the new Parliament was lifting the public sector pay cap. Quite clear, very simple, lift the public sector pay cap and allow the public sector unions to negotiate with the employers on pay, on all the issues of work that are there. And you know what? The opposition parties voted with us on that, except the DUP voted with the Tories. So all those Tory MPs and all their crocodile tears about the contribution made by emergency workers amounted to absolutely nothing when it came to the issue of job security, investment, pensions and their own future. We all know what they did, we all know how they voted. Let's make sure the public never forget how they voted and given the opportunity to challenge the public. So, this government cannot last forever. I don't know how long it can last because, as Gordon said, it's in great disarray. It doesn't know what it's doing, it's not clear on how it's going to conduct the Brexit negotiation, not clear on lots of things. So we challenge them every day in Parliament and we'll carry on doing that. And I thought it was right that this summer we do campaigning all over the country in the marginal constituencies. I congratulate all those that gained seats in the general election and those that worked so hard in every constituency to get the result that we did. We gained 3 million more votes in the general election than we got in 2015. The biggest increase in support for the Labour Party than in any election since 1945. We can all be very proud of the fact that 3 million people joined us in this determination to get a different government in this country. We didn't quite make it, as you know, and we're therefore going around the whole country in the crucial constituencies that we need to win, and I'll be in about 40 of them over this summer. We've been in the southwest, we're on the south coast, we've been in Cumbria, we're here, going to the East Midlands, and next week I'm doing a whole lot in Scotland, and this Saturday we'll be in North Wales. We're covering all over the country. And the enthusiasm of party members is amazing, and the support we received from so many in the general election. Because the general election was like a sort of parallel universe. You had this debate going on in newspaper editorials and late night TV chat shows and discussions. And then you had a completely different experience on the doors and on the streets. And I did about 100 events during the general election campaign all over the country. And you could just see it. People were coming out to have political debate, political discussion, and saying, austerity doesn't have to go on, there don't have to be homeless people, there doesn't have to be such poverty, there doesn't have to be such debt piled upon young people because they try to get an education. Things can be done differently. And throughout the campaign, a lot of people came on board and joined us because they could see in our manifesto something not just managerial, something transformational about their lives and about our society. So it wasn't a young person's campaign, it wasn't an older person's campaign, it was everybody's campaign for the kind of decent, socially just society we are all determined to live in. That is what Labour is about, and that, I'm sure, you'll agree with me, is what unites us as a movement and what makes us so different from any other political party or any other movement. And so this campaign goes on the principles of the economy we want, on the principles that we will invest in crucial infrastructure by a national investment bank for every nation and every region of the UK, where those decisions will be made to ensure that there is fairness of infrastructure investments. There will also be a preparedness to intervene in industry, intervene to ensure jobs are protected, and intervene to develop new and sustainable industries in this country. So we wouldn't have walked by on the other side while the steel industry was in crisis. A Labour government would have intervened and not allowed Redcar to close down, or so many other steel workers' jobs to be put in jeopardy, just as we would also invest in new jobs for the future. But that also requires rights at work. as I said, rights at work on the principles put forward by Becky Long-Bailey on May Day, when she set out the workers' rights agenda. And we'll work with everyone in the party and the unions to put details onto our policies of rights at work and rights of training opportunities for young people. But it's also about health, and it's also about education. The health service is the greatest achievement of the Labour Party. A national health service, healthcare as a human right, free at the point of need, is quite incredible. That was done by a post-war Labour government going through a period of the greatest stress there's ever been in this country. They could have so easily politically said, well, it's a bit difficult, can't do it this year, let's delay it a bit, let's put it off, let's make it an aspiration of the future. No, they did it because they believed in the equality of need for healthcare for all and established the National Health Service. Yes, it's still there. Yes, we fully support it, but it is in danger. It's in danger of the way it's been internally marketised, the way in which many services have been privatised, the way in which the wages have been frozen, and the way in which investment has not gone to areas of need. So immediately we would suspend the sustainability and transformation plans and put emergency funding into the NHS in order we can consider seriously how we deal with the maternity service and emergency service needs of the future. We'd also put money into the mental health services because there has to be a reality of the parity of esteem between mental health and physical health. There is not. There's a mental health crisis. Too many young people suffer in silence, and sadly, too many, often young men, take their own lives because they feel a sense of loneliness and desperation. That means a properly funded mental health service, but it also means that we all challenge and stand up against any stigma that's attached to anybody going through a mental health crisis. It could happen to any of us, and possibly will happen to many of us during our lifetimes. Let's think about those things. And the last area of health is that of social care. There are 1 million, mainly elderly people, but not exclusively, who are in need of social care support, either in a home or in a care facility of some sort. They don't get it, so therefore either family members have to give up jobs and careers, often women, to care for them, or if they're very dependent, they're stuck in hospital wards when they shouldn't be there. They should be getting care somewhere else. That leads to a knock-on effect. If others can't go into hospital, operations get cancelled, and it then leads to a backlog, and it's almost a sort of blame culture of why you're here, shouldn't you be somewhere else? So we look at the social care crisis, pledge to set up a national care service which will ensure that there is treatment and support for people who have dementia and conditions like that, just as much as there is obviously support for people going through cancer or heart conditions or serious issues like that within the NHS. Yes, it's going to cost. Yes, it will mean an increase in corporate and taxation for the very rich in order to achieve it. But if we want to live in a decent, healthy society where you don't get support on the basis of a postcode lottery or a sweetheart deal between Surrey County Council and the Tory government, then we have to have a national determination on social care, and I'm determined that we will achieve that. And Barbara Keeley and I are working very closely together to develop policies to bring that about. So at the next election, Labour will, yes, commit to supporting the National Health Service, and yes, commit to a social care service and to a mental health service worthy of the name. That is what we're about, a party that wants to ensure those services are there as a right. Gordon mentioned about college and university education. It is beyond tragic the way in which a funding formula for schools means that too many of our young children are in supersized or oversized classes. Therefore, their educational chances are diminished. The lottery of supply and provision of preschool means that some children get good nursery provision, great. Many don't. Many get second rate or none at all, and start primary school already at a disadvantage compared to others. I'm determined that we will have provision of preschool, nursery, play, social integration provision for all children for at least 30 hours a week for all children in every part of the country, because those very early years, it's so important that children's first experience of being away from the family home is with other children of all backgrounds, and they learn to grow up together. And so then in primary school we fund properly and ensure that the school head teacher isn't going through the crisis of which teacher to get rid of, but is able to think about how you can develop the curriculum and develop the school itself. And so it means, again, challenging the funding formula. It also means other provisions such as a free school meal for all primary school children in every school, in every part of the country, eaten together, no stigma attached, no free school meals or non-free school meals, a meal free for every child in every school, eaten together. That surely is the kind of message we want to give to everyone across the country. And one very small part of the manifesto, just a couple of lines, but something I'm very committed to and very proud of, is the commitment to the pupil arts premium, so that every child will get to learn a musical instrument whilst they're in school. Because that, again, improves their education attainment, but it also encourages the creativity and imagination that's there in children, because it isn't just about formal bits of education, it's also developing that sense of the collective. And I was with some groups in Morecambe this morning who were doing a lot of work on music with young people, ensuring they all got the chance to perform, play together and develop, and they all said what a great impact it had on their lives and how it helped them in school. But later on in the education career, it comes the college years, the training years and the university. We looked at this very, very hard and very, very long, and we're looking at the problem created by university fees of £9,000 a year, the problem created by college fees, the problems created with the loss of EMA, and the problems created by fees for adult education. And we decided that we would be prepared to put the money into the system to ensure that we could get rid of those fees and make sure that everybody who's able to benefit from university or college education is able to do so without fear of being saddled with a debt of £50,000 when they get a degree. Surely other countries can do it. Other countries recognise that education is a benefit to all and are prepared to put the money into it. And I want us to have a Labour government that recognises that education is the key to freedom and success for so many within our society. Gordon is developing those policies. I'm very proud of the work he's done, and I thank him profusely for what he's done, what he's doing, and I look forward to the day that he's able to propose that legislation in Parliament to bring that about. The last thing I want to say is this. As a party, we've grown. We're now 575,000 members, and we have more unions affiliating to us. We're pleased to welcome the FBU back to affiliation, and we have more members coming from all walks of life into the party. We're now looking at the details of how we develop our policies, because all of you have got experience, all of you have a unique experience, all of you have knowledge or ideas. We need to be able to incorporate those ideas, how we develop the details of our policies. We've set out the principles in for the many, not the few, but we need to put the details together on it, and I look forward to your contributions on that. And I've also said to CLPs, why not take policy making out? Have community events in which you discuss with the local community. What would you like to see in Blackpool? What are the improvements you would like to see? How would you work with the Labour government to improve transport connections, to improve job opportunities, improve community provision, improve the possibilities of new jobs and new industries in the area? How would you work together to protect our environment? All those issues, people have ideas, and the more people feel they can talk with us and to us and about these ideas, then the stronger they're likely to be in supporting those ideas come election campaigns. Elections are not won just in the 3 weeks of the campaign. That's a crucial part of it, obviously, but they're actually a long-term prospect, long-term continuous campaigning. The 1945 election was won many years before because of the way in which so many people mobilised people over a long time to challenge the austerity of the 1930s and the misery of it. We can do it all again. We can do it all again in a different 21st century way. We don't walk away from the principles we've got. We enhance those principles and use social media campaigning and all the campaigning methods that we've got to get that message across. But we also recognise that we need a government that is going to be prepared on the world stage to stand up for our environment. Pick up the phone to Donald Trump and say, sorry mate, you're totally wrong about the Paris Climate Change Accord. You've got to support it. American people are going to suffer from climate change, global warming and pollution of our seas just like people anywhere in the world. You cannot solve environmental issues on your own. You can only do it together. So our government will reach out to support global agreements on climate change, on emissions and on pollution. And we made it very clear last year the way in which we deal with environmental issues in this country, which is supporting, accepting and keeping all the EU rules on environmental protection, and that we would end fracking in this country for the danger that it does to our environment. Because there has to be a better way of producing energy that doesn't pollute the watercourses and what goes with it. And so we have the opportunity here. An opportunity to strengthen our party, the opportunity to continue our campaigning, the opportunity to work with people for something better and something different. Are we to have another 5 years of cuts, closures, poverty, austerity, homelessness? Are we to have another 5 years of a government that seems incapable of standing up for human rights in Saudi Arabia or the Yemen, that seems incapable of standing up for environmental protections around the world? Or are we to have a government that wants to get tariff-free trade agreement with the European Union, a government that wants to work for social justice and equality in our society and redistribute wealth to those that need it rather than those that have got a little bit too much of it at the present time? You know what the options are. You know what the feelings of people are. That's our strength. That's our party. And that is what we're very determined to achieve. So whenever an election comes, bring it on. Bring it on. We're ready for it. We're ready for it anytime it comes. Thank you very much, Blackpool. Thank you all you do, and all the best for you.
Questions. So I'm going to ask you to keep your questions brief, and Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to keep your answers brief as well, so we can move around. I'm going to get told off later, I know I am, but... Right, so 3 questions. Marjorie, 2 and 3. There we go. Right, I'll let you go.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome, Jeremy. Unfortunately, to one of the most deprived towns in England, but there it is. This is a question for Blackpool, and it does regard the many and not the few. Due to large areas of legal welfare work being affected because of the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act 2017, meant that the poorest in our communities cannot get proper representation within debt, employment and benefit issues. These areas of legal aid being removed. In relation to housing, there are considerable areas that have also been cut. Due to the fact that Blackpool is now recognised as one of the most deprived towns in the country, suffering from child poverty or low-paid work and unemployment, with so many families living in private houses in disrepair, which are damp and unhealthy. A group of us are in the process of forming a legal welfare advice centre. We are, however, in the early
last year, it was announced that Blackpool is a social mobility hotspot. How would you ensure disadvantaged young people have the same opportunities as our wealthier counterparts?
The problems of the previous two questions overlap mine. I live in a house down the back here, which is the back end of Blackpool, the part that visitors don't visit very often, and for good reason. I live in a private accommodation. I got a 6 months rolling lease, which means every 6 months I have to pay to get my lease renewed. Okay, I've got a fairly good landlord, but all around me are people who move in and out of houses because they can't get help. The houses are, there's one house in particular, that since I've been in mine since December, they've had 4 different families since December last year. 4 different families in and out. There's another one next door but 2 to me, who've had 2 different families since December. People just leave, people living on other people's settees. There's junk, because when they leave they can't take their stuff with them because they can't afford to move, so they just dump it on the road or in the back alleys. And it's just poverty personified. Is there anything that the party can do on that score?
Thank you for the questions. I'll deal with all 3 together if I may, because as you know, I've got to go on to do an event in Southport tonight, which some of you may be coming to, I don't know. It's going to be fun, it's going to be on the beach, and the tide's going to be out. At least I hope it is. Otherwise we've got a really serious problem, and I don't know anybody in the party except Steve Rotheram who can walk on water. Of the questions, first of all, the one about law centres, legal aid and access to justice. I've been involved with law centres in my own community and elsewhere all of my life, really. And law centres, at their best, make a fantastic contribution. They change things around because they provide a good place to go and get legal advice, also representation, and also advice which can often prevent a case getting to court and deal with it without going through a legal process, but deal with it by agreement. A good law centre can achieve that. Therefore, I absolutely support the campaign to establish and fund, and I do believe it is the role of local authorities, and I know they've been heavily cut, and I would want a Labour government to be able to empower local authorities to support and fund law centres in order to ensure that they're there, because it's that sense of community representation that's important, and they can become a catalyst for good levels of community action. But that doesn't take anything away from the problem we have, that the legal aid that was made available, it was one of the achievements of previous Labour governments to make legal aid available, which gives equality of access to justice to all, was taken away by this government. I was on the Justice Select Committee from 2010 and challenged the government on this, and we produced a number of reports pointing out what the effects of legal aid cuts are going to be. And that has led to many people going to court unrepresented, a growth of Mackenzie's Friend representation, or a growth of people who've got somebody who turns up to represent them who is unqualified and not very good at it, and as a result the justice disappears somewhere down the line. I asked Willie Batch, who's now the Police and Crime Commissioner for Leicestershire, a Labour member of the House of Lords, to join the Justice team and prepare a report on our proposals to return legal aid and our proposals to return access to justice to all, because it should not be the lottery of life that decides whether you get a fair hearing in court or not. It ought to be a right to be represented by a qualified person in court. We did get a proposal turn up at our Justice Select Committee, which was probably quite well-meaning, but I think wholly misplaced, which was to say, would we support regulation for Mackenzie's friends to get special facilities in court? Well, actually no, because what I want is facilities for qualified legal representation in court for everybody, not some kind of second-class representation for those that can't afford it. And Willie Batch will be producing his legal aid proposals in time for conference, and I hope that they will then become the basis of our policy. But the fundamental of it is the return of legal aid to ensure there is equality of access to justice for all. Thank you very much for your question. The second question on social mobility, and you're quite right, Blackpool is one of the poorest places in the country. It does have the highest levels, amongst the highest levels of deprivation, and it does therefore have the lowest levels of social mobility. You deal with that by housing, you deal with that by education, you deal with that by investment in good quality jobs, and you deal with that also by improving income and wage levels. It can't be right that in modern Britain, many of those that access food banks are people in work, because the wages are so low, they have to access a food bank in order to put food on the table for themselves and their children. That has to change. And so what we offer, what we say for Blackpool is investment, is regulation. I'll come on to the housing question, and also investment in education so that all of our children have the same and equal chance. It's something that Gordon and I are very, very committed to achieving. And that will improve the social chances of every young person in every part of the country. And I think we should look at it in terms of the areas of greatest stress and greatest deprivation and put the most resources into areas that need the greatest levels of support. That's why we brought in Sure Start, that's why we introduced children's centres in the past, and I find it beyond sad that we're losing so many of those places that gave such a great start to people in life. A Labour government will bring those back. The other point that was raised on housing, absolutely right. We're not building enough houses in total across the whole country. There's 200,000 households, roughly, created every year. There's about 100,000 or less new properties coming on stream. But that, within those bald figures, there's obviously a huge problem, and there's less being provided than there is need for. But beyond that, there's also a question of what is being provided. Some of those so-called starter homes are out of reach of people. Some of those shared ownership things are impossible for people, even in relatively well-paid professions, to access. What we have to do is invest in good quality, lifetime tenancies, socially rented council housing in order to give people that sense of security. The private rented sector, with 6-month assured short-hold tenancies, absentee landlords buying up large swathes of property which they never even visit and employ an agent to manage on their behalf, is simply not acceptable. We will regulate the private rented sector, regulate it so it's fair, regulate it so there are long-term tenancies, and regulate it so there are fair rents within the private rented sector. It's simply not good enough that those living in the private rented sector have less security, often pay more in rent, particularly in big cities, than anybody else, pay the highest energy bills because they have the lowest levels of insulation, and have the worst experience in which repairs are necessary to their properties. And so, it will be a Labour government that will deal with that issue, regulate the private rented sector, invest in the social rented sector, and yes, provide support for young people who want to buy their first property. I don't see any problem with supporting that in any way. What I'm not prepared to accept is the idea that new house building should be concentrated on luxury apartments sold off-plan in London and the South East that are then kept empty as a land bank against the rise in property prices in the future, whilst at the same time people are homeless. Grenfell Tower was surely a warning to all of us. A towering inferno where predominantly poor people perished in the richest borough in this country. And it's apparently beyond the wit of Kensington and Chelsea Council to provide homes for those hundreds of people that were displaced because of Grenfell in a proper manner. And that is an indication of just how bad it's got. So I wrote yesterday to Theresa May saying the Grenfell inquiry has got to deal with all the emergency issues surrounding Grenfell. It's got to deal with the funding of the emergency services around emergencies such as Grenfell, but it's also got to deal with the issue of the quality of life and housing stock for so many people in so many parts of the country. It took Cathy Come Home film all those years ago, made by Ken Loach, to expose what was happening then. Sadly, it's all back. We need a Labour government that's going to seriously deal with the housing crisis that blights the life of so many people in this country. Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to finish there. I just want to thank everyone for coming today, especially like to thank Jeremy for visiting Blackpool North and Cleveland. I know, as you say, you've got 60 constituencies and you've got someone to visit. So
60 was 40 last time.
so maybe you know the Caliban.
You know something I don't know.
Maybe. You should stay with that holiday a bit longer, I think. Thanks to Gordon as well for coming. I just also want to thank the Imperial Hotel for letting us have this venue today, and also to all the volunteers who made the events today possible. You all know who you are, all been fantastic. I couldn't have done it without anyone, and all the help you gave, so thank you very much. And again, thank you to Jeremy Corbyn.